I've never been to the Rose Bowl game before. I've just been to the Rose Bowl to watch games, but I've only been in the stadium a few times. I've never been to the Rose Bowl game. And we get to change that in about 14 or 15 days. And I'm excited about it. And it's the early game too. Okay, let's dive in. Let's crank it up. The Rose Bowl, New Year's Day, picturesque as you could possibly get. Michigan versus Alabama. Just imagine the blimp shot, Colin, Jesse. Imagine the maize and blue juxtaposed to the crimson. And we're just a little speck there on the field somewhere. Awesome. Unbelievable. Do you understand how far away this game looked growing up in Harris County, Georgia when I was a youth? And now we get to be there. Amazing. The Rose Bowl's in Bama's fight song, isn't it? I just realized that. Okay, so things have aligned from this perspective. We will get no viewership on this whatsoever in Tallahassee, and I understand it totally. But it should be a very, very good game. I've looked at this thing for about a week now. There is no huge edge. Okay, in regular season, week 2, week 3, a lot of times you think, oh, we just haven't learned enough about a team. There'll be a huge edge here, huge edge there. Dude, there's no huge edge here. FanDuel line is currently Michigan favored, -1.5. Over-unders in the mid-40s. So there's no huge edge. There's no guarantee. There's no, promise that no one will finish -3 turnovers and you'll have 2 special teams score. Of course, that sort of thing could happen. But that deviates from what the norm would be. The norm, if we simulate this thing 100 times, is a whole bunch of really competitive games. So again, we're looking for margins. We're looking for incremental edges that add up to a win for someone. Now, there's the prevailing theory. The prevailing theory on Michigan from people outside of the Big Ten is, yes, their defense is legit, but it's a little bit inflated. They are top 3 defensively in the country in points per game, yards per game, pass yards per game, explosive plays allowed, and red zone. And I don't think I've ever talked to anyone this year who doubts they're a legit unit, but there are a lot of people who say, yeah, but I wonder what they do if they faced multiple explosive offenses. The most explosive quarterback they face this year is Kyle McCord, who doesn't have the threat of mobility like Jalen Milroe does. So Bama pops teams over the top constantly. They do it against everyone. Ironically, the only team they didn't do it against was Georgia, and they were still efficient enough to win. But they've also got Jalen Milroe with the ability to make you pay with his legs. And they started to use that a whole lot more around the midpoint of the season. And so it's one of those great unanswerable questions until it gets answered. Is Michigan's stat profile just fully legitimate? And does it translate? Does it meet the freeze point, as we like to say, no matter what level of competition they're playing? Or if that level of competition ramps up, or conversely, if the water pressure against the dam increases, might there be a crack or two there that you didn't necessarily, you weren't fully aware of? Happens all the time in sports. You just wonder about Michigan. I know a lot of people outside of the Big Ten wondered about them. Well, good news, they're going to play the game, so we get to see it. J.J. McCarthy is probably the most interesting player in this game to me, actually. I got a lot of confidence in him. I got a lot of faith in his ability, but I also don't think that they needed to ask him to do a lot down the stretch. Now, also, I don't think he's without flaw. His game is not without flaw. And so he'll make a mistake. He'll make an errant throw. But at the same time, he's not a true freshman. And I've just watched him his whole career and wondered, when that big moment comes, and make no mistake, this is it. The Ohio State game was it, and this right here is for sure it. And they have to ask him to win a game because they're not necessarily doing a whole lot else on the ground against Alabama. Is it going to be there? Are his receivers going to be able to fight? There will be no easy catches here. There are going to be a lot of contested balls, especially with McKinstry and Terry and Arnold, and you've got a very, very good secondary, and for Alabama, a secondary where every guy has settled into their role, and a lot of them know each other's roles. They've cross-trained a lot back there. So yards, tough to come by. Completions, tough to come by. That's why J.J. McCarthy, to me, is maybe the most important player in this game, because it's not arm talent. It's not how far can you throw the ball. It's about 7 or 8 windows, 7 or 8 needles he's going to need to thread over the course of a 4-quarter game, and he cannot go 6 for 8, or else they lose, or they run the risk of losing. Another thing that stood out to me when I watched the SEC championship game with Alabama is they look, Georgia fans notwithstanding, most folks who watch the SEC championship game will tell you Bama's offensive line just dominated vast portions of the game, but their yards per carry didn't reflect it. Their total yards on the ground didn't reflect it. And it's almost like you had two different things. See, normally the rushing statistics fall closely in line with how your offensive line perform. Sometimes there are outlier performances where your offensive line and its performance all of a sudden kind of detached itself from what your rushing numbers were. And sometimes that's just guys didn't hit a hole properly, or someone tripped and fell on what otherwise would have been a 56-yard gain, and it throws the entire stat category into a blender. Jace McClellan was their starting running back, and he was out for the SEC championship game. Now, we assume that he'll be back for the college football playoff game. If they get the kind of performance they did up front on that offensive line, or anywhere close to that, against Michigan, I would assume they'll probably be able to run the ball a little bit better than they did against Georgia. Of course, you've got Jalen Milroe as being a big part of that too, but it'd be interesting if they don't. It'd be interesting, again, if you get to halftime and you think to yourself, man, I feel like Alabama's offensive line is kind of on the line of scrimmage. Let's see, 2.8 yards per carry, 63 total yards. That makes no sense. Does Michigan have the ability to force short fields against Alabama? Because they've done it all year long. Michigan, offensively, is not an overly special team. Rushing, Jesse, I think you told me they're in the 60s. I think that's what our stat pack said. It's not a team that's lit it up in any kind of offensive stat category. They're a football team that's been dominant. And it is a complementary team game. And part of that is when your defense has been as good as theirs, it gives an offense really short fields to work with. That defense has been key all season for them. And the two times I watched them in person, Penn State, defense owned the game. Ohio State, forced a turnover early, offense turns it into a short field score, ends up being marginally the difference in the game. Well, if they do that against Alabama, that's how they beat Alabama. You can look at these sheets all you want to and say, ooh, Alabama's got a little bit better athletes. Well, I think Alabama's going to be able to run the ball a little bit better. I like Alabama a little bit better on the perimeter. Well, not if Michigan's average starting field position is their 45-yard line, you don't. Because that means that defense has taken over and forced turnovers like they've done all year. Now, conversely, that'd be my biggest fear if I'm Bama. If I'm Michigan, my biggest fear is, what if they get pressure on my quarterback, which I think they will, but we can't run the ball effectively? Because that is a legitimate threat here. Bama, at second half of the season, has not only had pretty good success against the run, they've had success with 4 against the run. I mean, they've been dropping 2 safeties back against a lot of these teams. Now, they used to be able to play that way all the time, and lately it hadn't been like that, but they've gotten themselves improved enough at the linebacker position, and they're good enough on the interior defensively where they can do that again. And honestly, a too high look is not even necessarily what you need against Michigan, but if they can afford themselves the opportunity to do it, then all of a sudden that turnover concern shifts over towards the Michigan offensive side because you're not going to be able to stretch the field against them. And if you score, you're going to have to do it in 8, 9, 10, 11 play drives, and it's just, I don't think it's something that Michigan is well suited to do. So one of two things needs to happen. Either Michigan's going to be able to need to run the ball a whole lot better than on average we've seen teams do it against Bama, better than Georgia did it against Alabama, or Michigan defensively is going to have to set that team up with short fields because those sustained drives, I don't think, are in Michigan's wheelhouse here. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. Right now, FanDuel has Michigan minus 1.5. We are the total opposite. Our model has Bama minus 1.5. So we think the wrong team is favored here. And truthfully, I had a good feeling where I was going on this at the SEC championship game. I felt like either one of those teams, if given 3 weeks to get healthy, were going to be the team that I picked in this matchup. I assumed that we would probably see this matchup at some point. I felt like both of them matched up good against Michigan. I feel like Bama matches up good against them. So I've painted you the path for a Michigan win. Wouldn't be shocking. But the way I'm going in the game, statistically the more likely path to me is Alabama wins this. And, of course, Alabama covers in the process. No huge edges. Just think they're that much better in the end. And so that sets up Bama versus fill in the blank for the national championship game. My pick tonight has been Texas, so would we see a Bama-Texas rematch? Perhaps. Or maybe we see Michigan-Washington, and I go 0 for 2. That's why we play the games. But I'm really, really, really looking forward to that matchup. Hey, consider this. Before we just cut this off, well, the show's not done, but the prediction almost is. Think about how weird this dynamic is. Bama goes to the playoffs all the time. When's the last time you saw them in a playoff game and they weren't the team the pressure's on? There's immense pressure on Michigan and Jim Harbaugh in this game because Harbaugh's the one who hasn't gotten it done. Harbaugh's the one who hasn't gotten it done in bowl games. Harbaugh's the one who hadn't gotten it done in playoff games. And this year is what it was all about. It wasn't about the regular season. And look, internally, they had a ton of confidence they were going to get past Ohio State again, and they did. And as we knew this year, the winner of that game was going to be the Big Ten champion, and they were. Get to the playoffs and win a playoff game, at least. Get to the national championship game, or the season's a failure. Every Michigan person knows that. Not a failure in the classical sense of the word, but you have fallen short of your preseason goals if you don't make it. Now, take that and compare it to where Bama was in week 2, where half their own fan base thought they were going to lose 3 or 4 games. And here's Nick Saban just dragging his team, kicking and screaming to the SEC championship game, and they win it, and they're in the playoff. And they're a 1.5-point dog. I think more pressure's on Michigan. And I'm not sure I've ever said that about an Alabama playoff game. So just an interesting little dynamic to keep an eye on there. I don't know that stuff means a whole lot. Sometimes maybe it does mean something, but just something to keep an eye on.